Hey everybody, good morning still. I'll encourage us all to find our seats. And let me start by thanking you for being here this morning. My name is James Rondo. I'm the president and Eloise W. Martin director of this great museum. And I'm thrilled, truly thrilled, to welcome our Women's Board back, to welcome all of you back to this signature program after 3 years, our annual Luncheon. Through programs, resources, and partnerships involving children, teens, families, and adults of all backgrounds, our museum champions the role of art and culture in people's lives, promotes access and equitable participation, and fosters the creative and critical thinking that strengthens our museum and our city. And of course, as always, the Women's Board continues to be an enduring champion and partner in these efforts. Thank you. Today we have the great fortune of hearing from Carrie Mae Weems, one of the foremost, incisive, and I would say deliberate artists of our time. So thanks again to all of you. Thank you, Judy.
Good morning, and it's a pleasure to welcome everyone here today. Corporate sponsors, host committee, patron sponsors, esteemed guests, and students and faculty. Thank you all for joining us for the long-awaited return of our annual lecture luncheon. It is a true honor to have Carrie Mae Weems with us this morning as our featured speaker. Thank you, James, for your support and your partnership in making today's event a reality. On behalf of our Women's Board, I'd like to express our enormous gratitude to today's co-chairs, Eve Reppin-Rogers and Lori Sugarman-Lee. Your tireless efforts, talents, and enthusiasm towards making this event both memorable and successful are so very appreciated. Our board's mission to support and raise funds on behalf of initiatives in learning and engagement throughout the museum is able to be realized again this year thanks to Lori and Eve's creativity and leadership. Needless to say, our program today would not be possible without the generous support of our premier sponsors, Christie's and Graf. I would also like to acknowledge the generous support provided by our host committee and our patron sponsors. Again, it's wonderful to have all of you with us here today for this very special lecture and luncheon, and I would like to now welcome James back to the podium.
Thank you, Judy. Really so much appreciated. And again, our thanks to the Women's Board always. So the focus for today, Carrie Mae Weems. In a career spanning nearly, not quite, but nearly 5 decades, Carrie Mae Weems has bridged photography, video, language, and performance in a bracing American requiem of loss and anticipation. Refusing the glibness of history's veil, Carrie Mae undermines hierarchies and stereotypes of race, gender, and class with startling immediacy and relevance. Trained first as a dancer and a photographer before enrolling in folklore studies, which we may hear about, Carrie Mae received her first camera as a gift when she was only 20 years old. Balancing compassion in her family pictures and stories, made between 1981 and 82, with the necessary caustic wit in Ain't Jokin', made between 1987 and 1988. Carrie Mae, with her searing images and often attendant captions, implicates our own assumptions about what and who and exactly, and maybe more importantly, what narratives are being represented, who is speaking, and for whom. In the 1980s, Carrie gained renown for this concision, often centering her own body in her photographs, powerfully striding or standing in for anonymous figures and for Black women eroded by history. In 2010, our museum presented the entirety of her iconic 1990 kitchen table series, a concerted and vulnerable photographic meditation on meditation, on loneliness, friendship, femininity, masculinity, family, so much more. This, again, I can't overuse the word when it comes to the kitchen table, iconic series will join our collection. It's a promised gift from our trustee, Eric, and his wife, Liz Lefkowski. We're thrilled and grateful for the Lefkowskis' generosity in supporting Carrie Mae's work in this regard. And the iconic series joins a collection of about a half dozen other gifts and purchases of Carrie's work. It proves that we've done important work, but also proves that we have more to do together. In addition to Chicago, Carrie Mae's work is in most, if not all, prestigious international collections around the world. The artist received a MacArthur Fellowship in 2013 and was the subject of a retrospective at the Guggenheim Museum in 2014. In the years since, Carrie Mae has created several major new bodies of work, which I hope, perhaps, maybe, I don't know, she will share with us today. Some of that is on view recently in a very comprehensive retrospective that opened in Stuttgart in Germany. To conclude, I just want to selfishly introduce a very personal note. I can say that I've had the very distinct pleasure and honor of knowing Carrie since, I looked it up this morning, 1995. We met almost 30 years ago now at the Wadsworth Atheneum in Hartford, the only museum job I've ever had other than our Art Institute, Hartford. And the Wadsworth was the site of Carrie's earliest solo, her first solo, and still, in my mind, one of her most important solo museum presentations. So for me, it's wonderful to continue a sort of narrative and personal professional arc with the honor of knowing Carrie. So, sorry to go on long. It's my great honor today, again, personally and professionally, to welcome Carrie Mae Weems, the courageous rhetorician, generous teacher, and truly great artist to our museum, the Art Institute of Chicago, today. Thank you all again. Welcome, Carrie Mae, with appreciation.
Good morning, 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 good morning. Judy, Eve, Laurie, thank you for inviting me. James, thank you for the long, long, long friendship, devotion, and dedication. Good morning, Anita. It's really great to see you. A woman stands in the thaw of winter, the beginning of spring, reflecting, considering, imagining, contemplating the past, and imagining the future. With one step, she could be in the future in an instant, or in the past, or in the moment, the now. But to get to now, to this moment, she needs to look back over the landscape of memory. Lost in memory, the woman faces history. A history with a story that's been told 1,000 times before. But if you look closely, here and there, one could see the fluttering wings of doves, wings like time batting out beats of hope. Hope was the thing missed, the thing hoped for. You could almost taste it, but it was just out of reach, just above your head. I start every morning with this sort of sense of reflection, of trying to understand where I am, what I'm making, what I'm committed to, and why it matters. I started this work, and I'm probably best known for the Work Kitchen Table series of James has said. I think it's rather extraordinary that it has become this iconic body of work that is referred to over and over and over and written about endlessly. And it's been an important way of working and marking, a way of understanding the relationship of women and family, friendship, the dynamics of friendship, the dynamics around family, the dynamics around domesticity, the problems around monogamy, the problems around polygamy, the questions that we are, I think, all engaged in around this thing we call the nuclear family. Trying to unpack that, look at that, examine that was one of the most important things to me at a time when all of that was on the table, beginning in the 1970s when feminism began to sort of rear up and point us into other ways of reflective mode, considering who we were as women, and then, of course, who I am as a Black woman as well. The work that I had done, I think, and I'm going to talk to you a bit about a lot of the work that I've done over the last few years, really has to do with this kind of ongoing examination. I think, for the most part, that we are who we are from almost the very beginning of our lives, and that we grow into the fullness of ourselves as we experience. That we are usually interested in a few things very early, and they propel us. And they force us, that motivates us, it encourages us, it digs at us, it bites at us, until we sort of get it right. And then, of course, we spend a lifetime trying to get it right because there's no such thing as perfection. I realized at a certain moment that I was really interested in architecture and the role of architecture in material culture, and how architecture really underscored a great deal about what we thought, what we believe, what we practice, and how we live our lives, the slave coast along West Africa. The role of architecture. The role of architecture in the lives of real people, I think, is essential and really important. What is the role of architecture in a city like Chicago? What does it tell us about who we are as a people if we're really paying attention to the structure of things that are around us? It's sort of amazing way in which I think architecture has the ability to inscribe who belongs and who doesn't, is persistent and consistent over time. I realized at a certain moment, after I'd made this photograph, actually what I was looking at, what I'd seen, right? The femininity of space, as opposed to the maleness of space, right? Laid out clear as day, right? In a culture in Mali that underscores, really understands its role as the relationship of architecture to the body and the relationship of architecture to gender. Fascinating, fascinating, fascinating. So I've been standing in front of architectural spaces for a very long time, again, trying to understand really the role and nature, the function of architecture in relationship to the body, in relationship to the human form, how we're made to feel in relationship to the architecture is always key. And I keep coming back to it again and again and again. I keep mining it again and again and again because it's so incredibly rich, so dynamic, so full, and leads me into spaces of habitation that I think are really important, that allow me to question in certain kinds of ways. My time in Rome, of course, I won the Academy of Rome Award several years ago, I think maybe in 2006, 2007, something like that. I'm getting really old. And I spent all of my time really just marching around Rome with my camera, getting up very, very early in the morning and going to these very specific sites that I really needed to understand. Not only did I want to look at ancient Rome, but I also wanted to look at Mussolini's Rome and fascist Rome, what that looked like and how that positioned the body. And then just as I was finishing up, on the last day, I'd photographed in Rome consistently for about 9 months, like almost every day, with the exception of the time that I made a film at Cinecittà, where Fellini made his movies. It was fabulous, great experience. Now, my last day, May 1st, I made this photograph. It's like the last photograph I made standing in front of a museum, 2007. 2006, 2007, one of those years. And I immediately realized what was happening, what the possibilities were. Because now I've been standing in front of Roman architecture, ancient architecture, Mussolini's architecture, fascist architecture. I've done the same thing in Berlin and in other places. Then I realized that there was something even more important, that I really needed to then stand in front of museums, that I needed to point to museums at this sort of critical moment in time where museums were really beginning, almost beginning, probably should have been thinking about their contemporary role in contemporary society. What is the role now of the museum? And of course, we know that that role is being questioned and challenged in every quarter, that something is going on, and that this incredible demographic shift that we are now finally experiencing in its fullness, in its depth, in its richness, right, is now calling on institutions of all shapes and sizes to really reconsider what is in and what is outside of those institutions. And so even though I started this work long ago, it's only really now that museums actually are starting to pay attention to this work that I've actually made in front of museums, right? Begging that question of who is in, who is out, and why. What is the role, what is the function of the museum, and what will it be in the future? Because clearly the role of museums is going to change. It will not remain the same. And how that all shakes out will be for all the young people that are out there, all the students who are at the Art Institute taking classes. It'll be for you to figure out what this will be for you and the following generations, but I think of it as being really absolutely extraordinary. A really wonderful moment in time to really begin to sort of unpack what institutions are, what their responsibilities are. What do we do with the indigenous? What do we do with the work that has been claimed? What do we do with the work that has been brought into our institutions that belong to other cultures when those other cultures are asking for the work back? I mean, these are huge, complex questions that I have no answer for, but I'm aware of the question, and sometimes it's more important to have the question than it is to have the answer. I thought it's, thinking about this is the first public lecture I've given in like 2 or 3 years. Like, COVID just kicked my butt. I mean, it just like wiped us all out. And I'm just like amazed, and I'm standing before anybody saying anything. Hallelujah, right? I mean, right, we could be gone now. From Here I Saw What Happened and I Cried was this important project. I always have these like contested projects. People threaten to sue me, and all kind of awful things happen to me, and I'm a really nice person. But I started this project, From Here I Saw What Happened and I Cried, for the Getty. And for some reason, I always wind up being like the first, Like I was like the first woman, the first artist, a living artist to do a project for the Getty. I was the first African-American woman to be given a solo, African-American to be given a solo exhibition at the Guggenheim. I was I'm always the first. And that's why I'm all bruised up. Getting through that door is a monster. And so the Getty contacted me about doing this project. I worked in this project. And it was this way, From Here I Saw What Happened and I Cried, was just this way of beginning to sort of unpack a lot of material around the history of photography, the history of Blacks in photography, the history of Americans in photography, the history of the ways in which representation had functioned in American photography, and a whole host of other things. It was just sort of, not unlike Kitchen Table. It was a way of sort of really unpacking a number of ideas and questions with 36 pieces of work or less. You became a scientific profile, a Negroid type, an anthropological debate, and a photographic subject. Now, Harvard had threatened to sue me for the use of these photographs when I used them a number of years ago when I presented them at the Getty, but I knew that I had the right to use them because of the context in which I was actually showing and making the work. And then I thought, well, maybe this would be a really good idea if Harvard did sue me, because we would actually then be able to have this sort of conversation in public, and it might be worthwhile to do. And then Harvard said, And then they decided to buy the photographs. So I was completely perplexed by this time. I didn't know. Several years ago, just as a horrible tragedy happened in Charleston, where the Emmanuel Church was attacked by a young man and destroying 9 lives. And Spoleto that year, the festival that year, invited me to participate in the festival, and I decided to produce a project called Grace Notes Reflections for Now. We presented as a part of the Spoleto Festival, thinking about not only what had happened with the Emmanuel 9, but of course there was also a rise in the killings of young Black men all over the country. And so I've been really sort of working through this for a number of years and decided to create this performance, inviting my friends and my colleagues to work with me, working with musicians and composers, James Newton, Jerry Allen, the great Jerry Allen on piano, the wonderful composer James Newton and Craig Harris working with me as well, along with a number of really wonderful poets and dancers and so forth. And so I've been doing this kind of work, sort of unpacking this kind of work for quite a while now. And one of the things that I was having really the most problem with is I was desperately trying to get this work done, making this work, underscoring the work. I had called the piece Grace Notes, and yet I didn't have a meaning for the word. I didn't have a meaning for the word grace. I didn't have a meaning for the word grace. And so I called all these people and I asked them about what is it? What is grace? How do they define it? You know, and people would, say this sort of rote thing, God's unfavored, kindness. I mean, some sort of pat thing that, they had gotten from somewhere. But it still bothered me a great deal, and it was really finally only in speaking with my mother after a really long period of time that the meaning of grace and grace notes started to emerge. And my mother talked about ideas about compassion, the depth of compassion. And I actually have my mother on tape talking about grace. And I think it was the closest thing that I came to understanding what she meant. And I was hoping to then, convey that through the work itself. I continue to do a number of different projects. And I was invited by the Park Avenue Armory to produce a piece I've been thinking about for a very long time. And finally that show opened last year in December. Again, we were sort of impacted by COVID like everybody else, but it did give me time to sort of reflect and to think about the ways in which I was working and the kind of work that I really wanted to bring to the fore now. This is a piece called Sit, Stand, or Speak. And, it was a complicated installation. I wanted to have a contemplative space, a space for one to be able to simply rest in, because the work I thought was actually rather demanding. And so I've been thinking for a long time about sort of like the role of circus and the circus of politics and the politics of circus and how to bring those ideas into a round space, into a circular space that I would invite others to inhabit. So I developed a film, The Shape of Things. It's in 7 parts, and presented it inside this cyclorama, starting with these ideas of the things that we are actually sort of up against politically, morally, culturally. What are we up against? The meaning of the attacks on the White House, the meaning of January 6th, the meaning and the rise of Trumpism, the meaning and the rise of this sort of incredible shift of the right-wing politics, and what that has to do with the emergence of brownness and moving from black to brown in various shades of brown, so to speak, right? That we are up against something that is unprecedented in our history, in our life and time. How this will end is anybody's guess, but we are in it for the long haul with a great struggle forward. And so inside of this, I presented then this sort of, inside this circular space, this idea of a circle of politics and a circle of meaning in the implications of that on the lives of any number of people. We are people that are standing in condition. We are people that are standing in our winter. We stand in our winter, and how we make it through our winter is the thing that I keep coming back to over and over and over, that we are all in condition. Right? We are all in condition. And what does that mean? For me, I'm always trying to simply pose the question, simply posing the question of where we are and what that means and how to give it shape and volume so that it can be understood and certain questions can be asked, if not answered. A woman stands in the thaw of winter, the beginning of spring, reflecting, considering, imagining, contemplating the past, and imagining the future. With one step, she could be in the future or in the moment, in the now, but to get to now, she needs to look back over the landscape of memory. I keep coming back to my daily mantra of where I stand in relationship to the histories that I'm really most interested in exploring and examining, though of course I'm not a politician, I'm simply an artist. And this continues, this look through, this maze that I developed at the Park Avenue Armory of a number of different sites that one would experience throughout the course of their journey through the process. Right? So that there are always these sort of spaces where one can sit, one can stand, one can reflect, one can speak. And often in relationship to the projects that I put together, I always develop my own kind of educational program, my own speakers series, because I'm often interested in bringing together large groups of artists in order to have multiple conversations. And so as a part of the Armory Project, as was true with the part of my Guggenheim Project and any number of other projects that I put on over the years, I often have these educational programs where I might invite poets, historians, archaeologists, anthropologists, etc., to be involved in dialogue, sort of asking and addressing important questions of the day. This is the Astor Gates singing From Sea to Shining Sea. I might have, again, composers or musicians that I'm also working with, filmmakers, poets and writers, choreographers, dancers, the great Jason Moran. So I make this sort of an ongoing part of the project because I think that there's nothing better than having your friends and your colleagues and even some of your enemies in the room with you. Right, to really sort of work through a set of ideas and to use a sort of platform so that you have a greater sense of who's who, and what do people believe, and what do they think, and what are they standing for, and then how are they making it? As artists, how are they making it, and how are they crafting their meaning? How are they crafting their meaning? How many of you are artists? Can I see a show of hands? Okay, right? So we've got some artists in the group, right? How are you crafting and shaping, giving volume to your project, to those things that you feel most deeply? And we have like this extraordinary ability, I think artists have this extraordinary ability to speak to now in a way that nobody else does, right? You can do it through music. I'm actually working with Yo-Yo Ma on a piece around the Constitution right now that I'm so excited about. How do we get through to the truth in relationship to sound and language and image, and pull each other and stretch one another, I think, in dynamic and interesting ways? I also have a little organization. It's called the Institute of Sound and Style. And so even though I really don't like kids all that much, I still wind up working with them a great deal. I really shouldn't say that, but it's really true. And thinking about sort of, ideas in our community. And so I do all these projects. This is for the Kennedy Center when it was opening its new center, the Reach Project. I organized an artist parade. I just have to see certain things. And I think, the thing that I really like most about being an artist and the other artists that I work with is that we have a way of cutting through the bureaucracy. Artists are really trying to always be outside of bureaucracy so we can actually get something done, And I find it very, very useful. But parades, concerts and performances, lectures and talks, convenings with all kinds of other artists is as much a part of my work as anything else. And out of this, of course, has come a number of different kinds of practices, always, I think, sort of centered around several questions. It's always, again, centered around just a few things. This is a plate that I made 35, 40 years ago, commemorating every Black man who lives to see age 21. Still apropos. Repeating the obvious, thinking again about the extraordinary deaths that have happened amongst young Black men over the last few years. And we do know that during the Obama years that there was an escalation in the killing of young Black men on the streets, which I think is really fascinating. At first, I thought that I was just imagining this until I actually started doing research and found that there was somebody actually at the Washington Post who noticed exactly the same thing, that there was an escalation in violence and the targeting of young Black men during the Obama years, and they literally began to decline after Obama left office. This, I think, is telling. So I've been working with this subject, around this subject for many years. These photographs were made a long time ago, but I have only been working with them actually in the most recent years because the situation, of course, remains the same, unchanged. And then, of course, we had the sort of extraordinary death of George Floyd. This sort of amazing moment when we were all home because of COVID and something happened. It became like the straw that broke the camel's back because we had all of these other deaths, other murders. In fact, I have a whole series that I'm working on now of over 300 or more. I have all the photographs. They're all sitting in a little box, all under my desk, right? And then this thing happens where we're all eyewitnesses to a murder, and something erupts. Maybe if it had not been for COVID and we hadn't all been home watching, maybe the response would have been different. I don't know. All I know is that there was something phenomenal that broke loose, and all around the world, all around the world, people got up and they began marching and saying, no, 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 no. This cannot happen. This cannot happen. And what it has set in motion is also unprecedented. The killing of George Floyd has been amazing. I remember his young daughter saying, my daddy changed the world. She understood that, right? It's just phenomenal. And in the wake of that, were protests all over, and I went to Oregon, and I went to Portland, and I went to Oakland to look at the homeless situation. I went to Portland to look at the burnt-out buildings. I went to Moab to look at the sort of the shape of the country. I went to George Floyd's memorial and photographed there, looking at the sort of way that the town had been painted, for instance, in Portland, as a way of sort of dealing with the demonstrations and the burnout that was happening almost every day, right? And suddenly I thought, I'm looking like at a Moreau painting. I mean, these are absolutely incredible. I'm like looking at like a Rothko. I mean, it was just like this amazing way that all of this, just slapping this paint on had become this thing. And so I decided that I should photograph them, as many as possible. Again, in the wake of George Floyd's murder. I mean, these are absolutely incredible. Not necessarily intentional, but that is ultimately the meaning. What is this? All of this disruption. Out of all of this disruption also comes something like this, where a town is trying to negotiate what it should look like in the moment that it is being boarded up. It's just really an extraordinary experience for me. These images painting the town and dealing with this history of violence, my volumes of books, and memorial sites. I have many memorial sites, and unpacking these sites and thinking, of course, about the role of women in work, and sometimes, occasionally, being able to work with extraordinary women, like somebody like Mary J. Blige, who was very important, not only to photograph, but to really be able to sort of talk to her. She's a woman, really going through a serious breakup at this time, a husband who had just really sort of abused her, and she was willing to talk to me in a very special way, and I thought that I should make some very special photographs of her that were outside of the way in which she's normally treated. The same thing happened with Hunter Schiffer for Prada just recently. This young girl in the midst of her decision, deciding, transitioning from male to female. A father who is a Baptist minister, right? A mother who is deeply conservative. And she decides, she's the star of Euphoria, right? That she's going to do this thing. And she makes this decision when she's 14 years old. When she's 14 years old. And so I decided that I should absolutely photograph her and work with her for this campaign, because it was so unique, because it spoke to something about the future that we are about to enter. And then, of course, I do my sort of normal stuff, working around people like, other artists, other painters. Again, I'm always coming back to this idea of other artists and other painters, seduced by one another, yet bound by certain social conventions. You framed me, and I framed you, but we were both framed by modernism. And even though we knew better, we continued that time-honored tradition of the artist and his model. I'm always interested in the way in which one might be complicit in what happens to them. I think, Lori, we were talking about that a little last night. How are we complicit in what happens to us? When do we actually speak out, right? And then how do we speak out so that it's clear that we're not going for it anymore? Right? But working with Robert Colescott was really terrific, because working with Robert Colescott, assisted me in thinking about other ideas about making. You see, the thing that's very interesting, I'm going to share this with you. I'm invited by both, the museum and the Women's Board. Women are still very much undervalued. The work that we do is still very much undervalued. And even though I have this sort of name, essentially I think really my work is really primarily undervalued. I'm not confused. I'm not confused. I know that the work is undervalued, and it's undervalued primarily because I'm a woman, and secondly, because I'm a Black woman. Right? This has an impact. And when we look across the market, it tells us who is valued and who is not. And I think it's pretty fascinating. In this work, standing on shaky ground, I posed myself for critical study, but was no longer certain of the questions to be asked. It was clear I was not Monet's type, Picasso, who had a way with women, only used me, and Duchamp, who I love, never even considered me. But it could have been worse. Imagine my fate had de Kooning gotten hold of me. Various exhibitions, doing a lot of exhibitions lately, and looking forward to doing less. I want to really go home. See my husband. I'm afraid he's going to put all my stuff out on the porch. But it's been really great. This is actually an exhibition that is now touring in Europe. It started in Stuttgart, and now it's in Barcelona. And from Barcelona, it's going to the Barbican, and from the Barbican, it's going to Basel in Switzerland. So the work is actually getting some wonderful play, and it comes along the really beautiful catalog that was designed by a Spanish designer, Paco Lacoste. It's really a wonderful, wonderful project. And it's been a way of bringing work together, but also showing the work, too, in Europe in a more systematic way. So I've been doing all this stuff. This is the way in which the show looks right now in Barcelona, the way that some of it is installed. I'm very happy about that. Projects like Lincoln, Lonnie, and Me, Pepper's Ghost that I've been working on. This is showing at the Spanish Contemporary, the Barcelona Contemporary Art Space. And it's a really wonderful project, and hopefully one day we'll get a chance to bring it to Chicago. I'd actually like that, because I don't think the work has actually been shown here. James, maybe we can do something about that. You know, working with my students, constructing history, making these various kinds of histories. And these have been very important, you know. I mean, I realized at a certain moment in time that, you know, for the most part, if we really look closely at American history, from the 60s, that we sort of realized that in large part the country had become the way the country had become precisely because of the assassinations that had happened in the country. The assassination of Medgar, of Martin, the Kennedy brothers. Right? I mean, this was like extraordinary, that we would kill in the United States of America, that we would kill our leaders, and that this has had an extraordinary impact on who we are. And to the extent that we don't remember this, that John Kennedy was assassinated, that Robert Kennedy was assassinated, that Martin was assassinated, that Medgar was assassinated, is to the extent that we lose ourselves at our own peril, that we are not being reflective about who and what we are. So the road has been crooked. The road is not straight. And I'm going to just talk about this last project. This has been following my North Star. Following my North Star. And in following my North Star, I realized that a part of my history has been thwarted. Part of my family's history has been thwarted. My grandfather, Frank Weems, was a union organizer. He was a union organizer in the South. He was a part of the tenant farmers union in the South and had joined the union, was a very eloquent man, according to my father, who knew him when he was a small boy, and to other reports about him. Songs were written about Frank Weems. Frank Weems, I never knew, I never met, never saw. My sister has been digging around for my grandfather and word of my grandfather for years and years and years. She finally found some of his records. We knew that my grandfather, Frank Weems, had eventually made his way to Chicago. As a union organizer, he had been beaten and left for dead at the side of the road. And he became rather a cause Gillette. Because he was in the union, because the union was also based in the North and in Chicago in particular, we soon discovered that my grandfather had not died at the side of the road, but indeed he had been found in Chicago. And here's a photograph, the first photograph ever I saw of my grandfather just a few years ago, after years of searching and searching and searching. My grandfather, Frank Weems, I see his photograph for the first time, and he is in his lawyer's office preparing to sue the state of Arkansas for his mistreatment because of his separation from his family, his wife, and all of his children. We find his burial records here in Chicago. Is a photograph of my grandfather in his lawyer's office here in Chicago, again preparing to sue the state of Arkansas. Here is my grandmother, my father, and all of his brothers and sisters who had been kicked off of their plantation, who had been forced to live along with hundreds of other families by the side of the road. At this point, my grandfather has disappeared. Nobody knows where he is. Everybody is searching for him. And for the first time ever, Dorothea Lange, the great photographer Dorothea Lange, along with the great photographer John Frashon, are in the South at that moment, and they decide, because they know about what's going on with the Tenants Farmers Union and their efforts to organize, they decide to photograph my family on the side of the road. And the only person that Dorothea Lange ever mentions, she names my uncle, Clarence Weems, who remembers the night that his father, Frank Weems, disappeared. It's the only time she ever used anybody's name out of all the photographs she ever made for the Farm Security Administration. So the project that I'm working on now is in the name of my grandfather, Frank Weems. My family is continuing his suit to sue the state of Arkansas for his mistreatment. And I'm going to roll you just a little bit of 2 minutes of a videotape, a little bit about my grandfather and what happened to him. Can we go, Dashawn? A man and his wife stand in the winter of his decision. He knows that the only path is forward, He doesn't know everything that's to come, but he knows that there will be steep consequences for his actions, and he knows this before making even the smallest move. He can see it in his mind's eye. He can imagine the losses and the gains. He knows that some will come up short. He knows that some will endure unimaginable hardships, but it can't be helped. It's the price of the ticket. And worse is to do nothing. And so what are his options? He knows that a man must stand for something, lest he fall for anything. And so he joins the Union. Imagine that all you want is a fair shake, the ability to live in dignity, to raise your family, to watch them grow, to love your wife, to dance in the summer sun. Nothing more. And imagine for daring to want this, you are charged with the unimaginable, disrupting and disturbing the peace. And therefore you are terrorized, brutalized, beaten, and left for dead at the side of a road. This is what happened to my grandfather, Frank Weems. In 1936, in eastern Arkansas, near Earl, in the Boot Hill of the South, in that rich black earth of plenty, of single crops, black and white sharecroppers, tired of being tired and of making 75 cents per day, formed the Southern Farmers Tenants Union. For their efforts, they were terrorized, beaten, jailed. Some were murdered, and hundreds were forced to leave plantations and farms they call home. My grandfather, Frank Weems, was one of those organizers, and his efforts were to have serious consequences for himself and for my family. Dozens of families are evicted from their homes and forced to live on the side of the road. Thank you. So that is what we are doing with my grandfather, realizing that he had been separated from his family, realizing that at a certain moment that the Union decided not to really stand by him, realizing that Arkansas never paid a cent to him or to his family for what happened to him or the hundreds of thousands of others that were also mistreated. We thought that it might be important to sue the state of Arkansas. And so at least to have that debate about what this might mean, and I think of it in a larger sense, of course, that it has to do with the larger question of reparations in general and how that conversation is going to move forward. And I would suggest that for any of you that are interested in these kinds of questions, legal and or moral or ethical, that this is probably the next big wave that's going to be coming toward us. I want to close with just this. In the Alpha and in the Omega, in this mystery of all mysteries, in this infinite world warped by time, I'm asking myself, how do we measure a life? Do we measure it by the dreams imagined or by the hopes dashed? Do we measure it inch by inch, yard by yard, or foot by foot? Do we measure it by today, or day by day, year by year, or moment by moment? Do we measure it by yesterday, today, or tomorrow? Do we measure it by the miles walked, or by the mountains climbed and the valleys explored? How? Do we measure it by beauty, by race, or by class? Do we measure it by the mountains and the monuments built, or by the walls that have been scaled? Do we measure it by the wisdom of wise words spoken, or by that which is suffered in silence? Do we measure it over the forgotten or over the remembered? Do we measure it by all the near misses and the exhaustion, or by one's ability to endure? Do we measure it by our lover's love or our hater's hate? Or do we measure life by pushing against the tide, against family, against tradition? How? Do we measure it by the beginning or by the ending? By the moments gained or by the moments lost? Do we measure it by the way we confront life or by the way we confront death? Or do we measure it simply by the grace that is offered and given during a lifetime? How do we measure a life? And I ask you that question. Thank you all for being with me today.
Thank you so much, Carrie, for such an outstanding and a compelling program and for taking us on part of your journey with you. I think we will all reflect on this for a lifetime, so thank you for providing us with this experience. We are grateful to the Art Institute staff also for all of your support in making today possible, and thank the Art Institute faculty and students and those students attending from universities across the city. And please note, if you're exiting after the lecture, to please use the Columbus lobby. And I'd like to thank everyone in attendance today again for joining us for this wonderful program. So thank you.